I spent $8,000 flying my family out for my law school graduation. They backed out last minute and texted, "Sitting through that sounds like a nightmare." My aunt added, "Call us when you actually win something." So I sent them a photo of my diploma, draped over their empty front row seats. A few hours later, my mom called in tears, but I'd already blocked every one of them. I, 29M, never thought my law school graduation would become the day I finally cut ties with my entire family. But here we are. 3 years ago, when I started law school, nobody believed I'd make it. My family had a history of making jokes about my phases. First it was wanting to be a musician, then trying to start a business, and now apparently law school was just another whim. My dad used to say I collected half-finished dreams like other people collected stamps. My mom would laugh and add that at least stamps were cheaper. But this time was different. I worked 2 jobs while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. I spent weekends in the library while my friends partied. I lived on ramen and determination for 3 straight years, and somehow, against all odds, I was graduating cum laude from one of the top law schools in the country. 2 months before graduation, I made what I thought was a generous gesture. I booked flights for my parents, my 2 siblings, my aunt who helped raise me, and my grandmother. 8 tickets at $1,000 each, plus hotel rooms for the weekend. It cleaned out most of my savings, but I wanted them there. I wanted to prove that this time, I hadn't quit. My mom seemed touched when I told her about the arrangements. She said she was proud of me and that they wouldn't miss it for the world. My dad grumbled about taking time off work, but agreed to come. My sister seemed genuinely excited, asking about the ceremony and what I'd be wearing. Even my aunt, who had always been skeptical of my choices, said she'd be there to see me walk across that stage. The weeks leading up to graduation were a blur of final exams, job interviews, and preparation. I had already secured a position at a mid-sized firm starting in the fall, and for the first time in years, everything seemed to be falling into place. I kept imagining that moment when they'd call my name, and I'd look out at the audience to see my family cheering for me. 3 days before graduation, the first crack appeared. My sister called to say she might not make it because her boyfriend had planned a surprise weekend getaway. She sounded sheepish about it, but not apologetic enough. I reminded her that I'd already paid for her flight and hotel, and she promised she'd figure it out. She never called back. 2 days before graduation, my dad texted that work was crazy busy, and he wasn't sure he could get away. I called him immediately, my voice probably sounding more desperate than I intended. I reminded him that this was my law school graduation, not some casual event. He said he'd try, but his tone suggested he'd already made up his mind. The morning of graduation, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I checked my phone and found a group text that had been sent at 3 a.m. Mom had written that they'd all talked it over and decided not to come. She said sitting through a long ceremony sounded like torture, and they figured I'd understand since I was mature enough now to handle disappointment. The message was casual, almost dismissive, as if they were declining a dinner invitation instead of abandoning their son's biggest achievement. But it was my aunt's follow-up message that really cut deep. She added that they'd call me when I actually won something important, and that graduation ceremonies were just participation trophies for adults. She finished by saying they'd celebrate with me when I made partner at a firm, as if that would somehow erase this moment. I sat on the edge of my bed in my hotel room, still in my pajamas, staring at those messages. 3 years of sacrifice, $8,000 of my hard-earned money, and this was how they responded. I'd known they weren't the most supportive family, but I hadn't expected this level of cruelty. For a moment, I considered not going to the ceremony myself. What was the point of walking across that stage to an empty audience? But then something shifted inside me. A cold, clear anger that I'd never felt before. I got dressed in my cap and gown and headed to the venue early. The auditorium was massive, with hundreds of families already claiming their seats. I found the 8 seats I'd reserved in the front row, marked with the little cards I'd placed there the night before during the setup period. They sat there like accusations, empty and waiting. That's when the idea hit me. After the ceremony, after I'd walked across that stage with my head held high, after I'd received my diploma with honors, after I'd shaken the dean's hand and posed for the official photographer, I went back to those empty seats. I draped my diploma carefully across the middle chair where my mom would have sat. The burgundy leather folder contrasted sharply against the red velvet seat. I took out my phone and snapped a photo. The image was perfect, my hard-earned diploma displayed on the seat my family had abandoned, with the empty row stretching out on either side. The graduation program was still scattered around the other seats, and you could see the stage in the background where I'd just achieved something they'd never thought I could. I typed out a message to the family group chat. Since you said to call when I actually won something, here's my diploma. Keeping your seats warm since you couldn't be bothered to fill them yourselves. I hit send and immediately felt a rush of satisfaction followed by something that might have been regret. But I pushed that feeling down. They'd made their choice, and now they could live with the consequences. The responses came within minutes. My mom called first, but I let it go to voicemail. She called again immediately, then again. I could see the family group chat exploding with messages. My dad saying I was being dramatic, my sister claiming she tried to come, but couldn't find a last-minute flight, my aunt doubling down and saying I was proving her point about being immature. But I was done listening. I went through my contacts methodically, blocking each family member's number. Mom, Dad, both siblings, my aunt, even my grandmother who hadn't even responded to the original invitation. One by one, their names disappeared from my phone. On social media, I posted the same photo with a simple caption, "Graduated cum laude from law school today. Some seats are better left empty." I tagged no one, mentioned no names, but anyone who knew me would understand. The reactions poured in from friends, classmates, and professors. Congratulations, expressions of shock at my family's behavior, offers to celebrate with me instead. My law school study group invited me to dinner, and for the first time all day, I smiled. Update 1. It's been a week since graduation, and the fallout has been intense. Through mutual friends, I've learned that my mom has been calling everyone in our extended family, crying about how I've abandoned them and won't return their calls. She's apparently telling people that I'm being vindictive over a simple misunderstanding. My dad, according to my cousin who still talks to me, is furious. He's calling me ungrateful and saying I've always been too sensitive. He claims they were going to surprise me by showing up anyway, which is obviously a lie since they would have needed their tickets and hotel reservations. The most interesting development came from my grandmother. She somehow got my email address from someone and sent me a long message. She said she'd never received any invitation or information about the graduation, and that she would have moved heaven and earth to be there if she'd known. Apparently, my aunt had been the one communicating with her, and had simply never passed along any of the details. This revelation hit me hard because my grandmother was the one person I'd really wanted there. She'd helped pay for my undergraduate degree and had always believed in me, even when I was struggling. Learning that she'd been deliberately excluded from the loop made me even angrier at my aunt, but also sad that I'd blocked her number along with everyone else's. I unblocked my grandmother and called her. She cried when she heard my voice, and I nearly broke down myself. She explained that the family had been having ongoing drama that she'd tried to stay out of, but that my aunt had been increasingly controlling about family communications. Apparently, there had been some falling out between my aunt and my parents about money, and she'd been gatekeeping information to maintain control. My grandmother asked me to send her photos from graduation, and when I did, she immediately printed them and put them on her mantle. She said she was prouder of me than I could ever know, and that she was ashamed of how the rest of the family had behaved. We talked for 2 hours, and she filled me in on things I'd missed. My sister had actually gone on that weekend trip with her boyfriend, posting photos on social media the same day as my graduation. My brother had been at a friend's bachelor party. My parents had apparently spent the weekend doing yard work and never mentioned my graduation to anyone outside the immediate family. But here's the kicker. My aunt had been telling extended family members that I hadn't invited them to graduation because I was too good for them now. She'd been actively working to isolate me from the broader family by claiming I'd become arrogant and elitist since starting law school. My grandmother was furious when she learned this. She said she was done enabling my aunt's behavior and was going to set the record straight with everyone. She also told me that several relatives had been asking about me and wondering why I'd become so distant lately. This information changed everything for me. I thought I was cutting off family members who simply didn't care, but it turned out some of them had been deliberately kept away from me. My aunt had been orchestrating this isolation, probably because she was threatened by my success or jealous that I was achieving something she never had. Update 2. 2 weeks post-graduation, and the family dynamics have completely shifted. My grandmother kept her word and reached out to extended family members to explain what really happened. The response was swift and decisive. My uncle, who I'd always been close to growing up, called me immediately after talking to my grandmother. He was livid that he'd missed my graduation and even more angry that he'd been lied to about not being invited. He asked for my address because he wanted to send me a graduation gift, and we ended up talking for hours about everything I'd accomplished. 3 of my cousins reached out with similar stories. They'd all been told different versions of why they weren't included in graduation plans, ranging from, he only wants immediate family there, to he's too busy with his fancy new life to maintain relationships. All lies. All designed to make me seem like the bad guy. The most satisfying moment came when my aunt apparently called my grandmother to complain about family members taking sides. My grandmother, who is 78 and doesn't have patience for nonsense anymore, apparently told her exactly what she thought of her manipulation tactics. According to my uncle, it was a legendary conversation that ended with my grandmother hanging up on her own daughter. But the real vindication came from an unexpected source, my new job. The law firm where I'll be starting had arranged for a small celebration dinner for their incoming associates. During the dinner, the managing partner mentioned that they'd tried to send flowers to my family after graduation as a courtesy, but had been told by someone claiming to be my mother that I didn't want any contact with my family, and that they should send everything directly to me. This was news to me, since my mom had never received any call from the law firm. When I mentioned this to my grandmother, she immediately knew what had happened. My aunt had apparently been intercepting calls and messages intended for our family, including some from my undergraduate professors who had wanted to congratulate me. The depth of her manipulation was staggering. She'd been systematically isolating me from support systems while simultaneously painting me as the one who'd become distant and ungrateful. Armed with this information, I made a decision that surprised even me. I decided to give my parents one chance to explain themselves, but only if they were willing to acknowledge what had really happened. I sent my dad an email, not calling, since I wasn't ready for that yet, laying out everything I'd learned about my aunt's manipulation. I asked him directly whether he'd made the decision not to come to graduation himself, or whether he'd been influenced by my aunt's narrative about me becoming too good for the family. His response came 2 days later, and it was longer than any communication I'd ever received from him. He admitted that my aunt had been in his ear for months about how I was changing, becoming elitist, and probably wouldn't even want them at graduation. She'd suggested that showing up would be embarrassing for everyone because I'd likely ignore them or be condescending. He said he'd been looking for an excuse not to come because he felt out of place in academic settings and was genuinely intimidated by my success. My aunt had given him that excuse by convincing him I didn't really want them there anyway. Reading his email, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Anger that he'd been so easily manipulated, sadness that he'd felt intimidated by his own son's achievements, and a tiny spark of understanding about how my aunt had exploited his insecurities. Update 3. A month after graduation, I'm writing what I hope is the final update to this saga. My relationship with my parents is slowly healing, but it's complicated. We've had several long conversations where they've admitted to being influenced by my aunt's manipulation, but they've also had to acknowledge their own role in dismissing my achievements over the years. My mom broke down during one phone call, admitting that she'd always been afraid I'd outgrow the family, so she'd convinced herself that my successes weren't as important as they actually were. My dad has been quieter but more consistent in his efforts to rebuild our relationship. He sent me a card for my first day at the law firm, and while it was awkward and formal, it was progress. My siblings are a different story. My sister finally reached out with what I can only describe as a non-apology apology. She said she was sorry I felt hurt, but that she couldn't have known how important graduation was to me. She completely ignored the fact that I'd spent $8,000 on their travel arrangements and had explicitly told everyone how much this meant to me. My brother has remained silent, which is probably for the best. But the biggest development involves my aunt, and it's given me more satisfaction than I probably should admit. Word of her manipulation tactics spread through our extended family, and the consequences were swift. She'd been the self-appointed family coordinator for years, organizing holidays and family gatherings. But this year, several family members have simply started planning things without including her. My cousin decided to host Thanksgiving instead of my aunt, and when my aunt found out, She apparently threw such a tantrum that even her own husband was embarrassed. The family WhatsApp group that she'd managed for years became inactive as people started creating smaller groups without her. But the real karma came through her work situation. My aunt had been bragging for months about her son, my cousin, getting into medical school, positioning herself as the family success story. What she didn't know was that my cousin had been struggling academically and was considering dropping out. When he learned about how she'd treated me during my graduation and how she'd been using my situation to elevate herself while tearing me down, he was disgusted. He told her that if she couldn't support family members' achievements without making it about herself, then she wasn't someone he wanted advising him on his own career. This hit her exactly where it would hurt most. She'd built her identity around being the family matriarch and success coordinator. Losing that role has left her isolated and bitter, according to my grandmother, who still talks to everyone despite the drama. As for me, I'm doing better than I ever imagined. The law firm has been incredible, and I'm working on cases that challenge and excite me. I've built strong friendships with my colleagues, and I'm dating someone who understands ambition and celebrates success rather than feeling threatened by it. The most unexpected gift has been the relationship I've rebuilt with my grandmother and extended family members. Last weekend, my uncle and several cousins drove 4 hours to take me out to dinner and properly celebrate my graduation. We went to a nice restaurant, they gave me thoughtful gifts, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had a family that was genuinely proud of me. Looking back at that photo of my diploma draped over those empty seats, I don't regret sending it. It was a moment of perfect, crystalline honesty about who my family really was and how they valued my achievements. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept unacceptable behavior, even from family. My aunt's comment about calling them when I actually won something has become a running joke among my cousins. They now send me mock serious messages whenever I have any small victory at work. Congratulations on winning that client meeting. This seems like something worth a phone call. The empty seats in that photo represented more than just my family's absence from my graduation. They represented all the times they'd chosen not to show up for me, all the achievements they'd minimized, all the dreams they'd dismissed as phases. But they also represented something else, space for people who actually wanted to be there. And that space has been filled by better people, people who celebrate success instead of resenting it, people who understand that lifting others up doesn't diminish your own worth. Sometimes the family you choose is better than the family you're born with. My graduation taught me that lesson in the most painful and ultimately liberating way possible. I've kept that photo on my phone, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of my own strength. I walked across that stage alone, received my diploma alone, and celebrated my achievement alone. And I was proud of every single step. That's worth more than 1,000 empty apologies or 1,000,000 manipulative family members could ever take away from me.